NC pork. Good for the plate, great for the state. Welcome into Timeout, the Tobacco Road basketball show right here on the North Carolina Sports Network, presented by NC Pork. Learn more about the pork industry here in the bold North State at ncpork.org and follow them online at all the social at NC Pork. With me today, David Glenn. He's covered the ACC across 5 decades and is a 2-time North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year. And Coach Kerry Keating, the former Santa Clara head coach, assistant here in North Carolina at both Wake Forest and Appalachian State, now CEO of college basketball's hottest analytics company called Layup. Let's get right into it, guys. Our pregame chatter segment brought to you by Excel Moving and Storage. Follow them online at excelns.com. And our pregame chatter this week, DG, goes back to a big picture from this past weekend. What jumped out and grabbed your attention?
Yeah, Mike, it's great to be with you and Coach again. I am a little hesitant today that I have to draft players head-to-head with Kerry Keating, who's got about 30-plus more years of coaching college basketball experience than I have. But to answer your question as we look forward to our All-ACC draft later, I thought it was mostly a taking care of business weekend. Duke had a significant challenge at Virginia Tech. The Blue Devils took care of it. Carolina had to go on the road at Georgia Tech. It's only the Yellow Jackets, but most ACC road games can be adventurous. Carolina took care of business. NC State, the favorite, at Wake Forest, an old Big Four rivalry. As happened earlier this year when those two got together, the Wolfpack, the better team, again, the theme, took care of business. I thought the most important result of the weekend, since in almost every other case, it was the favored ACC team that got the job done, it came when Cal went to Miami and beat the Hurricanes in down-to-the-wire final seconds fashion. It was a thriller. The Bears are a good example of a middle-of-the-pack ACC team, right? You got Duke and a few others at the very top. You have Boston College and Pitt and others really struggling at the bottom. And then you have these middle-of-the-pack teams that need resume builders. Mark Madsen and the Bears now have 2 very impressive wins in league play. Remember, they beat Carolina out in Berkeley, and now they've gone to Miami and beaten the Hurricanes, maybe another NCAA tournament caliber team. And that goes with their best non-conference win of the season, which was when they beat nearby UCLA back in December, I think it was. The Bruins might also be an NCAA tournament team. So Coach Mark Madsen, this could be a breakthrough for him. It's only 1 win, but he's got a quality backcourt in Day-Day Ames and Justin Pippen. Yes, that is the son of Scottie Pippen. He has other nice pieces in Chris Bell, who's a sharpshooting transfer from Syracuse. A guy named John Camden is a really smart, gritty, tough kind of glue guy at forward who previously played at Virginia Tech. I like those pieces. Will the Bears win enough between now and Selection Sunday? We'll see. But to me, that was the biggest result of the weekend when we start our bracketology type conversations here in February.
Kerry, I know you were watching not only ACC games, but also some big wins around the country. And of course, we had Dusty May in Michigan against Tom Izzo in Michigan State. That's always a fun one. What really grabbed your attention from the weekend in college basketball?
This is the time of year where teams start to really separate themselves. And DG mentioned that middle of the ACC right now where Cal is almost starting to emerge out of that and may have some opportunities later on in the season that are few and far between because they've gone through the tougher part of their schedule. It really only lurks with the SMU game and maybe the Clemson game ahead of them if they can sneak in. But you have separation even in our league here too, right? The Blue Devils clearly like playing like the adult in the room. Everyone else, a bunch of kids running around, seeing if they can figure it out. There's a big middle, and then you have this kind of bottom right now where, and we'll get into this later about NC State. NC State has feasted sans Georgia Tech. So there's a lot to be said about how this league is shaping up and who's going to come out of that middle. The teams that don't turn it over well, and yes, I'm talking to you over there in Chapel Hill, 4-2 in the last 2 games. They're going to win games at home or on the road. If you can defend, rebound, don't turn over, you're going to win. And then obviously the analytics support that. And what really stands out And sometimes you have an outlier in this statistic because your defense can be so abysmal. But the best offensive teams in the A right now are lining up with the best records in the league. So it's becoming an aesthetically pleasing league the more that it goes forward. The question is, will it be enough to travel when the committee gets together and when the aesthetics go out the window and they try to really figure out which teams can win in March and deserve to be in the tournament? Possessions are important, and the league is shaping itself up to be who's mature and who's not. And you have a lot of challenges coming up here in the next 2 weeks that'll really define what that middle really is.
So here's the roadmap for today's show. We're going to talk NC State Wake Forest basketball from this past weekend in the first half. Our second half looks ahead to the first North Carolina Duke game of the season. And then in our overtime, we're going to give out our midseason ACC awards as DG and the coach go head to head as they draft the top 10 players in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Our first half today is powered by Emilio's Italian Restaurant and Sammy's Tap and Grill, two spots that have become unofficial headquarters for Wolfpack fans in the capital city. If you follow NC State, you know the scene. Red everywhere, every possession debated, every run celebrated. And Sammy's aren't just restaurants, they're where the belief in this program has been building all season. Big win over Wake Forest, 96-78. And guys, NC State shooting the lights out. And Kerry, through your quick coaching lens, when you see this kind of midseason jump that the Wolfpack and first-year coach Will Wade are making, what usually is going on inside the walls of that program that are making these positive things come to fruition?
Well, a little bit of an extension of what we talked about last week is the shortening of the rotation and really more of a definition of roles. We've been talking since the beginning of the season about Darian Williams and the expectations that were heaped upon him as the preseason player of the year in the league. But when you really get into it, and let's be clear about one thing about State, which I'm sure DG's itching to point out here, take away the Georgia Tech loss and maybe offset that with an at Clemson win, they've really had the easiest schedule out of the conference. So I think the reality check inside the walls over there with Will Wade and staff is we really have a tough stretch coming up. Yeah, we may be 7-2 right now. We may have given Georgia Tech a little bit of a gift, and you can say maybe stole one on the road in a tough place that's seemingly getting tougher with Clemson staying up the top of the league. But they have yet to play Carolina, yet to play Duke. I think they still have Louisville, Miami, SMU. That is a gauntlet if you're going through this league right now. So when you see that jump, you see, is it statistical? Is it role definition? I think it's a little bit of those things in conjunction with the fact that, let's be honest, they've had a fairly easy slate based on how things have shaped up in this first half of the season.
To that point, DG, how real is this surge for the Wolfpack?
It's a mixed answer because I do think part of the success was the schedule that Coach just outlined. But I also have seen signs of progress even against those lesser ACC opponents for the most part. One, the Wolfpack has become, I think, more unselfish. Remember that UVA win over NC State in Raleigh? It was only about a month ago as we speak. It was 76-61 Cavaliers over Wolfpack. And as a team, in that game, State had only 7 assists. Now, guys, there are individual players in college basketball who can average about 7 assists per game by themselves. And the Wolfpack had a total of 7 as a team. Against a month later, you've got Quadir Copeland among the ACC leaders in assists. You have Darian Williams, known as a scorer, but he's among the ACC leaders a little farther down, of course, with about 4 assists per game. Copeland's up there at about 6 assists per game, really close to number 1 in the ACC. Trey Holloman's another guard with a lot of experience who can be a good distributor when his mind is right. But whereas some things are uncertain as the Wolfpack jumps into that tougher stretch of the schedule that Coach described, my guess is there's going to be some more losses and bumps in the road. But what is most real for this NC State basketball team right now is that the Pack has one of the most diverse offenses in the entire ACC, period. In conference play, NC State is 3rd in offensive efficiency right now, behind only Duke and Carolina. The Pack is number 1 in three-point shooting in the ACC and one of the best in the entire country. And I brought up diversity because Paul McNeil hits threes. Darian Williams hits threes. Quadir Copeland hits threes. Trey Holloman hits threes. All 4 of those guys are each over 40% from long range. There cannot possibly be a lot of teams in America that have 4 different guys who spend a lot of time on the perimeter, and they're all hitting 40+%. As a team right now, State is over 40% with, of course, those 4 guys leading the way. They're also good, and this is why I think the offensive success is not going to fade, even if some other things become problematic. They limit their turnovers at NC State. They're also a very good free throw shooting team at State. They're not crazy far from 80% as a team. Last I saw it was 77, 78%. Just as Will Wade, remember, promised in the offseason, he is giving NCSN contributor Van Allen Lubin, who has a fantastic show with our guy Mike Waddell, he's giving big Van Allen way more minutes than he was getting at either Notre Dame or UNC earlier in his career. And guess what? Lubin is putting up the best numbers of his entire 4-year college career, just as Will Wade said he would, because of his efficiency. And if you apply that efficiency over a career high number of minutes, good things are going to happen. So I think Lubin is now one of the top 20 players in the ACC. I think Quadir Copeland is playing like one of the top 20 players in the ACC. I think Darian Williams is one of the top 20 players in the ACC. So that kind of offensive firepower and offensive efficiency, I just don't think it's going to go away. Again, even if the Pac loses a few of these difficult games that they have coming up shortly. And my last note on the Wolfpack, there's only 3 teams in this league right now that are undefeated on the road in conference play. One is Duke, one is Clemson, and the other is NC State. And I know only the win at Clemson, as Coach said, is the one that draws fireworks and is a resume builder with bonus points along those lines, because those other road wins were against Boston College, Florida State, Pitt, Syracuse, Wake Forest, right? Those are all bottom half of the ACC teams. But 5-0 on the road in conference play is still a heck of an accomplishment, no matter how it comes together. The NCAA selection committee is going to know that. So we'll see where the Pac goes from here. But, man, I think there's a lot of positive signs in year 1 under Will Wade.
We had Van Allen Lubin not only as our host, but also welcoming in his teammate Darian Williams this past week. And guys, I'm just amazed at how well they get along. And when you see that type of chemistry between top players and them talking about the things that they're doing off the court, Will Wade got a lot of grief from some people in the local media about some of the team building exercises he was doing, but it seems to have worked, and it's working at the right time. Kerry, short answer, how does Steve Forbes keep a locker room moving forward when the standings keep staring back at him like a 20-year-old Mike Tyson, just boom? It's rapid fire against Steve Forbes.
You hit the nail on the head in the question. The answer is short. You need to keep it short. You need to shrink the target. Really get focused on today. Don't let the standings creep into the mindset of what's actually happening, and try to maybe give them a 1 to 2 week plan that they can win. If you try to take on the totality of all this now, it's a losing battle. There's too much noise. There's obviously too much going on with social media, with contracts now, with agents, with the portal. You really need to shrink this down and isolate to a message that you can win, a plan that you can win, and see if you can wrap that into a week or 2 that can build. The best thing that can happen for them now is to get that momentum. And as we found out not too long ago, momentum into the ACC tournament can mean a lot going into the postseason, especially if you string a few together. Next thing you know, maybe playing for a championship. Not to say that Juke Harris and the boys can pull that off against this daunting schedule and league that the ACC presents this year. But when you're underwater like this, you really can't coach the whole season. You have to coach the next practice. Then it's the first 4 minutes. Then it's the first half. You got to protect your locker room from any type of finger pointing going on, especially nowadays where it's even more rampant potentially with the salary discrepancies that could creep in. And then you don't want guys playing for themselves. And the biggest thing that can hinder that is injuries. So you have to hope for the best. Make sure you manage your minutes right. Keep your starters intact. Keep your top 8 intact. And try to get it down to about 1 or 2 possessions at a time. And then see if you can string them together.
DG, clean takeaway here. When seasons trend this way, like this is going for Wake Forest and Steve Forbes, where do programs become most vulnerable?
In the short term, it can be that finger pointing in the locker room, which I don't believe is happening at Wake Forest right now, but it's a concern that has to be addressed by the coaching staff. Losing creates unhappiness and sometimes selfishness. But I think in the bigger picture, the bigger concern where Wake Forest basketball as an entity is most vulnerable is the perception of the program. Because part of recruiting is convincing people to be a part of something special. It has changed because you have a revenue sharing number now and you have a name, image, likeness money now, and everybody wants the bag. But underlying it all is still you want to be a part of something special. Steve Forbes has now been at Wake Forest for 6 seasons. And in year one, when he had a bad team, of course, everybody gave him the benefit of the doubt. He had inherited a relatively empty cupboard, and they were a bad team, but everybody understood why. And it was in the pre-revenue sharing era, and it was really at the very beginning of name, image, likeness money. When you go 6 straight years and don't make the NCAA tournament, by definition, you're on the hot seat. But on top of that, like a recruit or a maybe transfer in the portal after this year ends, they might be wondering, is Steve Forbes still going to be around? That hurts a program. That hurts the future of Wake Forest basketball. That uncertainty becomes a problem. And these are fair questions to ask. As much as we all like Steve Forbes as a person, not only is it just a uniform rule, 6 years, no NCAA tournaments, you're on the hot seat, but keep in mind, Steve Forbes just lost probably his second best player. We would all agree Juke Harris is his best player this year. I would argue his second best player has been the point guard, Nate Calmise. He's out with an injury, and there's no timetable yet for his return. So imagine going into the stretch that Coach just talked about, but without your second best player, who, by the way, did not play in that more recent loss to NC State in Winston-Salem. That's problems on top of problems. And if your second worst team at Wake Forest over a 6-year period is your 6th team, you're going to be viewed differently, because we all saw Wake last year. We all saw Wake 2 years ago, 3 years ago, even 4 years ago. All of those teams were knocking on the door. You could have made an argument, hey, young man, you're the missing piece for me. You could have said back then, come join Hunter Salas and the big fella Efton Reed and other good players, Cameron Hildreth, et cetera. Come, we need one more guy to get us to able to kick that March Madness door down. Right now, Wake is headed for the bottom handful of teams in the entire ACC standings. When your 6th year looks most like your 1st year, that puts you even farther along the hot seat, closer to the heat of 1,000 burning suns.
There are ACC benches that are definitely warmer than they were a year ago. Wake Forest, Syracuse, Notre Dame, Boston College, Georgia Tech, and others perhaps. In a league where the Big Ten and the SEC are always watching, this could get interesting down the stretch of this season and in and around the Final Four. So let me put both of you on the spot right here at the end of this first half on timeout this week. Kerry, from a coach's perspective, give me one warm seat in the AC and then one guy that you absolutely expect to be back next year.
The warm seats obviously usually trend towards the bottom of the league. But the thing that I'll say, obviously having been in those positions before, is you never really know what's going on internally. You never really know about the strength of the relationship between the coach and the decision maker about his or her job. I will say this, in year 3 at a place that expects to get back to some sort of glory of the Bobby Cremins years, if you will, I would think that Damon Stoudemire would have a chance to move forward on this, especially given his pedigree and given the current state of affairs in college basketball. I'll digress a little bit on this, because what's really going to be fascinating to me, guys, is not only are we having an influx of kids going to multiple schools within a 3, 4, 5, 6 year, sometimes 7-year period, I think it's going to be fascinating to me how many of these coaches are going to have the tolerance and the family ability to move from school to school as well, because you can clearly do things on a 1 to 2 year deal. And some of these guys may want to try to get ahead of the pace as much as they can and take any success as possible. It's not in the elite of the elite, and maybe move on. But I would think that Damon would be back. It's still early in his build, and I think you do get a little bit of runway at that, especially if they've already gone through some transitioning there at Georgia Tech. I don't think they'd want to have that happen again. In terms of someone that may be getting the most heat from the fan base, from the ether, if you will, and this is an easy one because we always talked about this, you never want to follow the guy. And if there's ever a place especially in the ACC outside of here in Tobacco Road, where there was a guy, it was upstate New York at Syracuse. And that's a really daunting one because he's still there, not going to leave, still has a house in the lake. Everything about Syracuse in the last 3 or 4 decades has been about Jim Boeheim, and all Adrian Autry being an alum and a successful one at that. Very daunting to take your first job as a head coach at that place. And I would think that the Syracuse faithful up there are so tainted in how and the expectations are so high from where Coach Boeheim had it. It's going to put a lot of pressure on Adrian Autry externally, because I think those expectations are a lot different up there than maybe anywhere else besides Carolina and Duke.
I'll tell you this, I wouldn't feel comfortable if I were Jeff Capel in year 8 at Pittsburgh. I wouldn't feel comfortable if I'm Damon Stoudemire year 3 at Georgia Tech. I wouldn't feel comfortable if I'm Earl Grant in year 5 at Boston College. I wouldn't feel comfortable if I'm Adrian Autry in year 3 at Syracuse, and I wouldn't feel comfortable if I'm Steve Forbes in year 6 at Wake Forest. We won't dive into the details for all of them, but one thing for everybody to remember is the university president, athletic director, head men's basketball coach, trifecta, is way more important than whatever is being discussed in the etherland and on message boards and on social media. I will not say that fans don't matter, because a university president and an athletic director, of course, have to monitor that picture, whatever it is, how crazy or how not it is. How do people feel about that coach? How much time has he had there? What is his relationship with the athletic director? Is the AD the same person that hired him? At Pittsburgh, the person who hired Jeff Capel was Heather Lyke. She is not the AD there anymore. So now Jeff Capel is working for somebody else. He has had only one NCAA tournament bid in 8 years with the Pitt Panthers. Just as 0 for 6 for Steve Forbes at Wake Forest is automatic hot seat, 1 out of 8 is automatic hot seat. Now, Jeff Capel does have several 4-star high school recruits already committed or signed for next season. How does that factor in? To me, my bottom line is the hardest to justify keeping of a coach out of this half dozen or might be a half dozen guys at least near the hot seat in the Atlantic. We only have 18 programs. 1/3 of those coaches out of 18 are at least in shouting distance of the hot seat, if not burning on that hot seat. To me, the hardest to defend keeping somebody would be Earl Grant at Boston College. He has never finished higher than 10th in the ACC in a 5-year period. He's near the bottom of the league again. He's the only ACC head coach who has been there for 5 years or longer without producing a single team in the top half of the ACC standings. BC has budget issues, name, image, likeness issues. It's not entirely Earl Grant's fault, but that was the only school that didn't even have a competitive roster by ACC standards. Everybody else at least had a chance if everybody stayed healthy. Speaking of health, if there's a reason that Adrian Autry gets some benefit of the doubt at Syracuse, and this is even in play for Micah Shrewsbury at Notre Dame, has only been there for 3 years, but he's been missing his star point guard for more than 10 games, Marcus Burton. That is going to factor into how he is viewed by the Notre Dame administration. Similarly, Adrian Autry was missing his best player, Donnie Freeman. I think it was for about 10 games. So Coach Autry won 20 games his first year at Syracuse as Jim Boeheim's successor. He only won 14 last year. I do think they're better this year, and their season's not over yet. If you're Pitt and Boston College and some others at the bottom, maybe you're Georgia Tech, your season's pretty much over. Notre Dame, I don't know if Syracuse's season is over yet. They have J.J. Starling's a good guard. Nate George a solid point guard when he's right. Freeman's a good forward. William Kyle's been playing pretty well for them in the post. Kyan Anthony is a talented freshman. Adrian Autry is a Syracuse alum, remember, played for Jim Boeheim. Does he get some benefit of the doubt there? And again, he's only in year 3. I think those longer tenured coaches are less likely to get benefit of the doubt. And those third-year coaches are more likely to get that benefit of the doubt if they need it come their version of March Madness. While others are playing basketball games, they're afraid to pick up the phone when the athletic director calls.
Moving isn't just about boxes. It's about trust. Since 1997, Excel Moving and Storage has been one of North Carolina's most respected relocation companies. They handle residential and commercial moves, local, long distance, and international, and operates secure, climate-controlled storage facilities in Raleigh and Greensboro. From fine art and pianos to automobiles and wine collections, Excel's trained teams handle the moves that matter most. Learn more at excelms.com. Excel Moving and Storage. More than a move, a professional relocation.
Some places don't just serve food, they feel like home. That's the Original Saltworks on Oleander Drive in Wilmington, owned and operated by Bob Hubert, and part of the daily rhythm of the Wilmington Beach community for decades. It's the kind of place where breakfast turns into lunch, conversations last a little longer, and the menu feels familiar. Eggs fixed your way, grits or hash browns, omelets, waffles, and cinnamon French toast. Then there are the lunches people come back for: homemade chicken salad, crab cake sandwiches, and classic burgers. They're open 7 in the morning through 3 in the afternoon at 6301 Oleander Drive. The Original Saltworks. Good food, good people. Just like home.
Our second half is powered by the Original Saltworks, the best breakfast and lunch combo place anywhere on the North Carolina seaboard. Check them out down in Wilmington the next time you're there, hopefully staying in a warm place and not at a cold place like we are here in the bold North State this week. Let's go back to our quick scoreboard context as we delve into our second half, where we're talking about Duke and North Carolina. The Blue Devils winning 72-58 on the road at Virginia Tech over the weekend. Cam Boozer, 24 points. The Blue Devils finished January undefeated in ACC play and moved to 20-1 overall. Now North Carolina goes on the road down to Georgia Tech, pull into Fulton County on the flats and win 91-75. This one not really that close. Caleb Wilson looking great. Henry Versar, Seth Trimble combining for 60 of the Tar Heels, 91 in that one. Carolina only committed 2 turnovers, DG, and they win their third straight now in their first Big Four rivalry game of the season. It is Duke and Carolina. Big picture, DG, you have been around Duke and Carolina for a long time, and when this game hits the calendar, what does a normal week feel like around these two programs?
Well, it's funny. I have asked a version of that question you just asked me of Dean Smith, of Roy Williams, of Hubert Davis, of Mike Krzyzewski, of John Scheyer, and even other coaches who have been a part of this great rivalry. Quick side note, there are only 6 programs that have won 5 or more national championships. One's UCLA way out there on the left coast. One's UConn way up there in the snowy Northeast. One's Kentucky, one's Indiana. Those are bordering states, but of course they're not members of the same league, and those two can go a decade and play each other only one time, I think, in the past decade, the Hoosiers and the Wildcats. Instead, of course, Duke and Carolina also on that list of 5 or more national championships. They're 8 miles apart. They've been members of the same league for the ACC alone for more than 70 years. They play each other twice a year. They attract some of the largest regular season audiences in all of college basketball every year. Duke Carolina 1, Duke Carolina 2. But when I ask those coaches the question, they say that one thing that they do is try to be as normal as possible all week leading into the Duke Carolina game. Why? Anyone thinking that Mike Krzyzewski or Dean Smith or Hubert Davis or John Scheyer is hyping these guys up, it's the opposite. They are trying to make it like another day at the office. Why? Because they know there's nothing normal about these guys' weeks leading up to it. You got the kids camping out for games when the game is at Cameron Indoor Stadium. You have your own version of chaos in Chapel Hill. These guys never stop hearing. Even if they block out social media, they can't go to class. They can't walk across campus without somebody asking them about the upcoming Duke Carolina game. And they can't turn on the television or check social media without seeing some reference to it. We already know that ESPN's Game Day is going to be there in Chapel Hill on Saturday, leading into this round 1 matchup. I'm just glad we have it, Mike. We celebrate the bold North State in every conceivable way in sports and beyond. And one of our crown jewels is the Duke-Carolina rivalry. It's up there with Yankees-Red Sox, whatever international soccer pairing you can put together. It is one of the greatest rivalries in the history of sport. As Jay Billis likes to say, it never lets us down, and maybe that'll be the case again on Saturday in Chapel Hill.
Kerry, you've been a part of a lot of locker rooms in these big rivalry games as a head coach at Santa Clara, as an assistant coach at all the places you've been and winning championships and going to a pair of Final Fours. What's your best rivalry game story that stands out as you sit back on a snow day and reminisce about your basketball career? What really stands out as part of those rivalry matchups?
As DG was eloquently pointing out the Duke Carolina, and I thought about other rivalries and in-state ones, there really is no comparison. Being at UCLA and having the good fortune to coach there, you got everyone's best shot because it was UCLA, because of the history, because of Pauley Pavilion. So it wasn't that every season presented a singular time of a rivalry week or a rivalry game. Although you could make the argument that at the time, for being one of the elite teams and what Lute Olson had built at Arizona, the UCLA-Arizona game kind of felt like that, but it's nothing like what's happening here at Carolina and Duke. And I don't think it ever will be, because even those other rivalries DG mentioned, none of them are even in the same state, let alone 10 miles away from each other. It's just fascinating. And when you really break it down, to have the good fortune that we do here in the Bold North State to witness this, to experience it, to have all the pomp and circumstance that goes with it, and a few slippages here and there along the way, notwithstanding, both of them at extremely elite levels every year. Even the games that aren't at that elite level, they're still going to have the hype and the rivalry feel to them and the importance of the game. But I don't know if you can find anything that compares to what this is week in and week out. Now, the bigger challenge this week, obviously, is what the weather will present for the students that are trying to get tickets to that game, because by and large, they usually have to camp outside. So I'm wondering what the limitations will be given the snow that has fallen here in the Triangle on the students camping out to get into the game. You talked about normal and almost reverse engineering the normal. A lot of that affects the players way more than the coaches. And it can't be said enough, obviously, with the bulletin board now being in everyone's hand. The bulletin board is in everyone's hand 24/7. They're dishing out, taking it. Like, I think the control becomes that you have to really take the outside noise and not let it affect your preparation. It's one thing to it that it'll affect their mindset and their euphoria and their excitement about playing the game. But I think whatever your preparation is as a coach, the one thing you can keep consistent without overhyping it or underselling it is how you're preparing for your next opponent, as you have up until this point for 20 some odd or so games. Keeping the preparation consistent and actually playing the game, I think, is probably the most stable way of coaching. Reduce some of that noise and that hype that's going to come naturally with this rivalry game, as Duke and Carolina always does.
Now, DG, you've seen a lot of Duke and Carolina basketball. You've covered ACC basketball on Tobacco Road in part of 5 decades. And that's pretty amazing. I'm not trying to call you old, but you've been around a while. But I want to go back to decade 1. You're a reporter over at the Daily Tar Heel, and you're covering your first Carolina Duke game, or just when you were covering games. Did you ever know something that you didn't report on because you were a student reporter? Or did you ever stumble into a story and say, man, this is something that I know nobody else is going to get? Because these guys, like Kerry said, there's really nothing like it with the combatants in these games.
Yeah, it is a little different when you're a student reporter, because you can encounter something that you're not even sure is newsworthy per se. Like, you could be at an off-campus party and there's a hammered, drunken player from this school or that. Is that newsworthy? I'm the sports editor of the student newspaper. I can decide what's newsworthy and what's not. So it's one of the only times in my career where some of those lines were blurred. I can't think of specific examples where I knew something was a news story. I think you know me, and you knew me back then, Mike. I've taken my objectivity very seriously from day one. In fact, when Coach K, who I admire and respect in 100 different ways, went after the Duke Chronicle student sports writers way back early in his career, that is one of the only times that I have clashed hard with Coach K, because my stance was, how dare you famous coach who, again, I admire in countless ways. How dare you live a life where you are preparing your athletes for their livelihood, whether in basketball or otherwise? How dare you carve out an exception for these people who are future journalists, and you're hammering them because they're writing objectively about the Blue Devils? I found that outrageous. I did TV shows, radio shows. This is all, of course, pre-internet back then. And there was a crazy story where one of the Cub reporters had a secret tape recorder in his bag while Coach K is absolutely ripping into them for not being positive enough in their coverage about the Blue Devils in the Duke Chronicle student newspaper. I was a little bit older by the time that happened, so I was filled with even more piss and vinegar than I was as an 18-year-old from Philadelphia. There's certain things in life, Mike, I don't back down on, and that was one of them. So I saw an interesting viewpoint of how that rivalry changed so many things, from that example to how Dean Smith used to view John Feinstein, who's no longer with us in either case, rest their souls. But John and Dean had an incredible number of similarities in how they viewed the world. But Dean also had this skepticism about John because John was a Duke grad and John was a fairly high-profile writer and certainly author for a long time. I also got to witness from a front row seat, Mike, end of the 1980s. Remember, I'm from Philly. I've seen a lot of great sports. I've participated in a lot of great sports. I've seen great rivalries, more professional than college up in the Philadelphia area. But there I am, 20 years old at my first ACC tournament, or my second one maybe, and it's Duke Carolina playing for the title at the end of the 1980s. And the intensity of that game, with legend Dean Smith in front of one bench and legend Mike Krzyzewski in front of the other, and All-American players on the court, and the stands by that point at the ACC tournament are just filled with either royal blue or that Carolina shade of blue, and the referees know how important the game is, and the TV people know how important the game is. It was insane, man. Even though I had been around sports my entire life, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I had already seen a game in Cameron during the regular season. I had already seen them play in the Smith Center during the regular season. I actually knew, unlike most of the last 25 years, where the players are way more often friendly, even as fans sometimes hate each other, Duke and Carolina players over the years are way more frequently friends off the court and go to the same barber and go to the same parties sometimes. At the end of the 80s, man, when I was 20 years old, those guys hated each other. They would have killed each other. They would have choked each other out. And I am barely exaggerating when I say that. I'm not saying every player hated every player, but it was far more back then what you saw among the fans. Whereas over time, just as Coach K and Dean Smith became friends later in Coach Smith's life, after literally sometimes pointing at each other and going nose to nose as competitors in a less pleasant kind of way. Man, books have been written about this rivalry. Seriously. My old buddy Art Chansky has written about it multiple times in fantastic fashion. It is unique. It is sensational. We could talk about the X's and O's of this Saturday's game, and two of the best front courts in all of college basketball. As Coach said, it's a rivalry game every year, but it's not a rivalry game every year where you have Duke's front court with not just Cameron Boozer, but Pat Gongba and Malik Brown off the bench are pretty darn good forwards. It's not just Caleb Wilson. Henry Vessar and Jaren Stevenson are pretty darn good big guys as well. To me, they're two of the best front courts in the entire country, along with being, of course, a part of this great historical rivalry. Which backcourt plays better is probably going to determine the outcome in Chapel Hill. But, man, obviously, if you get me going on Duke Carolina, I can take you in a whole lot of different directions, given what I've seen over almost 40 years now.
We're in 2026, and by 2032, there may well be a brand new arena on the University of North Carolina horizon, not on their campus, but Carolina North is the likely destination of Carolina's new basketball arena. And if you need any background on that, go back to last August, where Bubba Cunningham signed the new contract. And in the first set of his duties, he said that he would be assigned to Chancellor Lee Roberts' office to oversee the development of the Carolina North project. Bubba's not going there to determine where bars and restaurants are going. So let's put that aside. But David, as a Carolina alum who has covered the Tar Heel program for as long as you have, if this is one of the last Carolina Duke games to be played in the Dean Dome, what does that building mean to you as an alum? Take off your journalist hat for a second. Just talk to me as Dave, the alum and the college basketball aficionado, when you see buildings like Allen Fieldhouse or Cameron Indoor Stadium stay put, but then places like Reynolds Coliseum, Carmichael, and now the Smith Center likely to be put by the wayside.
Yeah, I don't think most fans, even journalists, myself included, I don't think when Saturday rolls around, that'll be on our minds. But in the bigger picture, I think people are ramp up the nature of the last game in the Smith Center, the last Duke Carolina game in the Smith Center, just the way we saw with Carmichael Auditorium or Reynolds Coliseum or other examples. I'm less emotionally attached than most people, maybe in part just because of my objectivity as a journalist. I was not yet in Chapel Hill when the Smith Center opened, so I read about that from afar. But when I got to be a student to finish my undergrad career, and then I, of course, stayed there for law school, I was mesmerized. So just as growing up in Philadelphia, I was mesmerized by visiting the Palestra, which was and remains one of the more historic college basketball venues in the history of the sport. I got down to North Carolina, I was mesmerized by Cameron Indoor Stadium. I truly consider myself fortunate every time I'm at a game at either Duke or Carolina or lots of other places that I've been able to go over the years. I'm less resistant to change than most people, Mike, but I know a lot of people in the extended Carolina family who it would be a slight exaggeration to describe it as they feel similarly as when a friend passes away. Obviously, human beings are always more important than buildings. But for some people, it is only a slight exaggeration. And when they get to the point that they know they'll never see something in that building, whatever they call the new building is a different thing. But that version of the Smith Center, I think, is going to be an incredibly emotional curve once that news becomes official. And once everybody realizes there are only so many games left in that on-campus version of the Smith Center.
Kerry, you coached at UCLA. You went with the Bruins at Ben Howland to 2 Final Fours or knew John Wooden. You've been a part of that incredible basketball culture. But Pauley Pavilion is still the home of UCLA basketball this year's, and they don't have all the amenities that are being talked about, and they're in Los Angeles. Can you ever imagine UCLA leaving Pauley Pavilion?
No, it's funny. As I was listening to DG talk about the Smith Center, and I was fortunate enough to play in the Smith Center a couple of times. And when we came and brought our Santa Clara team to play Duke in 2013, I believe it was 12-13 season, we actually practiced in the Smith Center. So I was able to bring my team to practice in the Dean Dome and play in over at Cameron. So a really cool experience for a bunch of West Coast kids who had no winter jackets at that time, let alone timely now that we need it now this week here in the Triangle. But bring them out to play that game. When I think back to my time at Pauley, and I'll let some folks out here on a little historical secret that they may not know. Back when that was built, they didn't allow freshmen to play. And Coach Wooden wanted to make sure that the freshmen had a full-size court to practice on. So they actually had a curtain at the end of one of the baselines, and behind it was a full-size court where the freshmen could practice. And the reason why that's significant is, and I didn't realize this till I actually got inside Pauley Pavilion, the court was off center from where the center hung in the arena scoreboard was, because they had to literally move the court to create that baseline. It's interesting that and I bring that up because there's unique aspects to all of these historical buildings, the success in there notwithstanding, that kind of make it what it is. All the little nooks and crannies that make it interesting, the historical aspect. Gosh, if they ever want to change and expand over at Duke, I can only imagine the outrage that would come up of, oh, we're not going to ever leave Cameron, even if it's just falling apart at the seams. We're going to play there till the roof falls down. It's different because they don't have the land, obviously, there in LA to move. They're already up against it, having playing their football games over in the Rose Bowl off campus, so they would never do that for basketball. I just think it's fascinating that we're even having this conversation and having this discussion when you have an institution in college basketball, and obviously here in the bold North State and in the Triangle, in the Dean Dome, that's going to move. It's going to be emotionally charged when that happens. I think DG mentioned the last game that's ever played in the Smith Center is going to read like a who's who of all-time basketball. You think about when you go in there, and we were very adamant at UCLA, good, bad, or indifferent. We don't hang Final Four banners. Coach Wooden spoiled them to only hang national championship banners. And I was kind of like, hey, so we just went to the Final Four. We didn't even put a banner up in here. Like, that's pretty significant now. But when you go to the Dean Dome and you just see all the recognition of all the players that have come through, not just the retired numbers, but the ones that they've recognized. And of course, the teams and the coaches and the seasons, the vast space that's in there to house the 20,000 plus some odd people that go to the games there, but all the space that they've utilized in the rafters that has been filled with success of players and teams. It's going to still take a pretty big arena when they do move north to hang all that stuff up or have it recognized individually, not just collectively on one banner, like here are all the national championships. You want to really make sure each team gets their proper due. Really a fascinating development, and going to be really interested to be a part of that here as we cover it, to see how it transpires, how it goes down, the timeline of the transition, and then the build up to that last game, which could be the hottest ticket to maybe ever exist in college basketball. Were you at the last game in the Dean Dome will become something that will live on for generations to come here in the bold North State.
The immediate one that is on the horizon right now is this first game of the year between Carolina and Duke. Kerry, will go to you, and then DG, you bring us home. Who is your pick to win this first Battle of the Blues of 2026, and why?
I'm going to go off the grid here because I think the fact that Carolina has 6 turnovers in their last 2 games, and I think a total of 14 in their last 3, tells me something that they're figuring something out on offense right now that could travel not just into tougher games and obviously other arenas, but for this game, as we've already eloquently laid out, and the difficulties that surrounded in preparation and keeping an even keel. We saw yesterday in a huge freshman matchup with BYU, Kansas, Darren Peterson step up in the head-to-head matchup with AJ DeBanya in terms of their stature individually. And I think Caleb Wilson has shown the maturity that he may be able to handle this game properly for himself within the team concept. The fact that they're taking better shots, that they're taking care of the ball, that they're involving guys off the bench. Henri Vassar may have taken a little bit of a backseat in production where he was earlier in the season, but he still has obviously an ability to impact the game. I'm going to go off here because people are going to think that Duke is just dominant right now, what they've done. I'm going to take Carolina in this game out of the fact that everyone else is probably going to take Duke just because. But I think the fact that it is at home gives them a little bit of nod, and obviously the emotions that come with this. I have this feeling like, I don't think it's a slip up for Duke, but it's more of a challenge for Duke than they've had so far this season on this level. I'm going to take Carolina in a 1-possession win.
Which team would I rather have if I were picking my March Madness bracket? Duke. Which team do I think will finish in the standings? Duke. Which team do I think is more talented? Duke. Which team has the best player? Duke. I'm taking the Tar Heels as well. The game's in Chapel Hill. These guys get as fired up as it possibly gets. Nothing will surprise me. If we were making money predicting these games, we'd be doing this show from a yacht somewhere in the Caribbean. So it's hard. But are the Tar Heels capable of winning this game? Yes. And the reason I say that is, I mentioned earlier, no doubt in my mind, these are 2 of the best front courts in America. It's just an embarrassment of riches for both coaches. Harder to predict for both teams is the combination of Derek Dixon plus Seth Trimble plus Luka Bogovac and others in the Carolina backcourt. Your guess is as good as mine. They can be really good. They've definitely gotten better since Dixon took over the starting role, no doubt about it. But versus a Duke backcourt, Caleb Foster's a good player, but not an elite player. Isaiah Evans can be a brilliant shooter, but he can be an inconsistent shooter, right? Caden Boozer is a very good freshman, but he's not yet an elite freshman like his brother Cameron. What's the Duke backcourt going to do under pressure in a rivalry game with so much at stake? We don't know, but I believe the game will be decided. Matchups will be fascinating. How does John Scheyer use Malik Brown, one of the best defensive players in the entire country, on that end of the floor? Who's Caleb Wilson got to deal with? Who's around Cameron Boozer for the Tar Heels? The guy's the National Player of the Year. You got to have a plan for him, and the Heels didn't figure out a plan for Abuka Okori of Stanford. So we don't know if they can execute a plan for Cameron Boozer of Duke. It's all fascinating to me. We could look at this from 100 different angles. My guess is the Tar Heels, just like I would pick the Devils to win in Durham, but nothing will surprise me. I just hope we all get the fun, close, intense, talent-filled matchup that this game usually delivers.
Hey, Wolfpack Nation. You already know that when we talk about the great traditions of NC State athletics, Amedio's Italian restaurant is right at the heart of it. Since 1963, it's been the go-to spot for generations of Pack fans. The walls tell the story, the food seals the deal, and every visit feels like part of the family. Whether it's pre-game pasta, post-game celebrations, or just a night out on Western Boulevard, Amedio's delivers every single time. Great people, great plates, and pure NC State pride. Stop by Amedio's, a true Wolfpack original.
In college sports, the teams that win aren't always the most talented. They're the most organized. They study the film, they build the game plan, and they execute with clarity and purpose. Your life works the same way. At Organize for Success, productivity expert Emily Parks helps busy leaders create championship-level systems for work, family, side projects, and everything in between. For more than a decade, she's coached clients to prioritize what matters most and eliminate the chaos that slows them down. If you're ready to run your life with the same precision as a top program, visit organizeforsuccess.com and set up your complimentary call. Organize for Success. Win the day.
Overtime is powered by Organize for Success here on the North Carolina Sports Network, helping leaders bring structure, clarity, and execution to what matters most. All right, let's keep this tight, gentlemen. Kerry Keating, the coach, David Glenn, the sports journalist extraordinaire. We are going to draft out our midseason All-ACC teams. 5 teams for DG, 5 teams for Coach Keating. The rules are simple. DG and Kerry are each going to draft 5 players. No duplicates. If your guy's taken, you move on. 15 seconds per player max. Headline thoughts only. Think on your feet. We're going to the playground. Start out with David. You get to pick first, followed by Kerry twice, then David twice, and so on. DG?
With the first pick of the 2026 All-ACC basketball draft, David Glenn selects the big fella from Duke University, Cameron Boozer. I don't know many 6'9", 250-pound guys that can do pretty much everything, including initiate offense from beyond the three-point arc, hit three-pointers, of course, defend and rebound and pass the ball well. There's no other place to start, even though I love a lot of players in this league. I've got to have Cameron Boozer on my side.
This is the one time I feel like I can do something that was historically relevant in taking a pick to protect the next guy to get his pick. As the second pick is Caleb Wilson for obvious reasons. The 2 best players happen to be 2 freshmen at the 2 biggest schools coming up head-to-head here in the weekend. I feel like if I took Boopy Miller with the next pick, it would be because I was trading it back to DG to get his next pick. Because I know this is DG's favorite guy. As I'm figuring out, he always goes outside the box and pins himself early to a guy that emerges to make him a little bit of a Nostradamus, if you will. But it's hard for me to go to my guy in this when SMU has put themselves in a position to play in the postseason. And obviously the season that Boopy Miller has had, and I'm a point guard guy at heart. So I'm going to take Caleb second, and I'll round that out with Boopy Miller from SMU.
That is exactly where I would have gone if Coach had taken Cameron Boozer first. Wilson and Miller would have been my 2 and 3. So I get the next 2, right? So I'm going to go with Henry Vessar, the big fella from Carolina. I think the guy has shown toughness mentally and physically. He's improved his ball security. He is a phenomenal, almost double-digit scorer and rebounder. He's a pretty good passer. He can hit threes. He's one of the best shot blockers in the conference. I want Henry Vessar in the post next to my Duke big fella, Cameron Boozer. And then because I need a guard, this one might surprise you guys a little bit. I'm going to go with Trey Donaldson of Miami. Coach took my favorite point guard. Trey Donaldson previously played at Michigan, previously played at Auburn. I believe he'll be All-ACC. I'm not sure he'll be first team All-ACC, But the guy's just a gamer. He's among the ACC leaders in assists. He's probably a 3-to-1 assist turnover ratio. He's a steals guy. He's a pretty good three-point shooter. He's just really mentally and physically tough. He's a senior. So now that I have Cameron Boozer and Henry Vessar down low, I need a guard. I'm going to take Trey Donaldson of the Hurricanes.
Okay, Kerry, you get picks 6 and 7.
You just made this interesting. Now, I could wait to the end and take a shot at this one, and I'm going to actually park this for my second pick, but I do need to go and keep it here in the triangle for a team that at 7-2 has to have someone outside of the obvious, and that obvious being Darian Williams as the preseason player of the year, but maybe the best player and the most consistent for Will Wade and his staff this year. And I'll put Quadir Copeland in that mix. Clearly having a statistical season that's warranted of a mid-season first-team All-ACC. So I'll throw Quadir on there. And this is good. I guess I'll have to do it because he might turn around and steal it from me. But although they're struggling, and we've talked ad nauseum about where this season may go for their head coach, I do want to keep some loyalty to where it started last year when I saw a little bit in him that he's made good on so far this year, and that's Drew Karras at Wake Forest.
Going to the Deeks for pick number 7. David, you come home with 8 and 9 here.
Great minds think alike because I was about to take Drew Karras. I'm going to go with Darian Williams of NC State. Coach took Quadir Copeland, and he took my guy Drew Karras. All right, I'm going to take Darian Williams. I need a wing guy now that I have a point and 2 posts. Darian Williams is hitting 40% plus from three-point land. He is a good facilitator. He's 2-to-1 assist turnover ratio. I think he has great basketball in him, especially when he's surrounded by other really good players, as he was at Texas Tech last year, and again in a different way at NC State this year. So that gives me 2 guards and 2 bigs. So let me fill out my 5 with the really talented guy from Stanford, the freshman, Buka Okori. He's averaging 20-plus points per game. He's one of the best freshmen in the entire country. That gives me a heck of a backcourt with Donaldson, Corey, and then Darian Williams on the wing to go with Cameron Boozer and Henry Vessar up front.
I feel like I'm getting to know DG better, and I almost felt like I could have chosen his team for him, knowing his affinity for the not-so-obvious Buka Okori. Great pick. And although another freshman has had a great season in a rookie ACC head coach's year in Testa Ritter and probably will fill that last spot, I'm going to go off script here, and we're going to go ACC adjacent, given the fact that the Duke-Carolina game is coming up. I watched this guy play yesterday, and I can only sit there and think, what if the junior guard at Carolina was not Kyan Evans, and all due respect to Kyan Evans, but Elliot Cadeau? What if Elliot Cadeau is now shooting better than 40% from 3 from the season for the number 3 ranked team in Michigan? So I'm going to go Elliot Cadeau as my 5th player, just because he spent more time in the ACC than he did in the Big Ten. And I think Ritter has earned that as another freshman in this league who has put Ryan Odom and his staff clearly in a postseason position to play deep into the postseason, not just play, but play deep in a great first season at Virginia. Another freshman that hasn't gotten a lot of shine because of Boozer, because of Caleb Wilson, but yet another freshman in this league to make it a really heavy, maybe 3 or 4 freshmen out of the top 10, true freshmen that is. And I think Testa Ritter at Virginia has earned that.
Do you think all 10 of these players are gone next year?
It's an interesting question.
Gone from their current team or gone from college? That's a double-ended question now.
Boopy's a senior, so we know he'll be gone.
No.
Cameron Boozer,
maybe, I don't know. He could also apply for his 5th year now.
Trey Donaldson's a senior too, so he'll be gone. Boozer and Wilson will be lottery picks, so they'll be gone. Others will have decisions to make. But one quick point, Mike, given coaches my 5, include Malik Renew, the Miami big guy, who will end up on the All-ACC team, I promise you. Ryan Conwell of Louisville, fantastic guard, Xavier transfer, playing wonderful basketball. RJ Godfrey is the best player at Clemson. If the Tigers keep winning at their level, he's the most likely to end up on the All-ACC team in the end. BJ Edwards is a guard at SMU who's really good. Amani Hansberry is a big man at Virginia Tech who's really good. Isaiah Evans of Duke wasn't selected. Van Allen Lubin, our guy here at the North Carolina Sports Network, he's among the 20 best players in this league. And there are others. It's impressive. I've covered the ACC long enough that even in some recent years, when I picked a 15-man All-ACC team, I wasn't super convinced that 14th and 15th guy were really fantastic, wonderful, outstanding two-way players. This year, there's 20 plus candidates for what in the end ends up being 15 slots for All-ACC. Coach and I just had fun with 10 guys today, but this is a good league, a better league, a deeper league, and we see that both with the projected 8 or 9 teams in the NCAA tournament, at least here in early February, but we also see it in the quality depth of the candidates that Coach Keating and I had to choose from as we were building our 5-man squads today.
Kerry, when you look at guys like Boozer and Wilson, obviously they're only freshmen right now. They're babies, essentially. How hard is it to project using analytics or just your coaching instincts about how good they're going to be 5-10 years from now? What is the ceiling for Cam Boozer or Caleb Wilson?
Pedigree says a lot about that now. And it's interesting because it's a little bit of a segue into where I had predicted before the draft would lead to at least my ACC midseason coach of the year. And I bring that up because this coach in particular has made it a point to do personality testing for his recruits and his players coming in so that they fit the mold of what his program is about. I think a lot more of that is going to become a lot more prevalent than it ever was. It's always existed at the highest levels. The NBA teams go extensively research, and the best ones do the best jobs of it to make sure guys are mentally and emotionally stable to handle the rigors of the transition from college into the NBA. And these kids obviously have 5 freshmen this year who can end up being the top 5 picks in the NBA draft. I recently saw something this week where I think Jamal Mashburn said Cooper Flagg would be the 6th pick in the draft this year had he stayed in his original class. Opinions notwithstanding, what it says is the depth of these freshmen. And to answer your question, Mike, guys like Boozer, obviously the family pedigree. You see what Caleb Wilson and his maturity beyond his years are doing for the Carolina program. It'll get the extreme test this weekend when they take on Duke. Conwell at Louisville, Renaud at Miami. We haven't mentioned anybody from Clemson. Yep. And I was hoping this would happen. Again, this is how you get to know your partners here. I knew this would go down this route. But if you have a team that's 8-1 in this league right now, and again, we talked about Will Wade 7-2 and maybe a little bit softened up with the schedule, but take that out of the mix, and you're talking about another year with Clemson, another year at the top of the league. What's amazing to me as I went through and looked at their stats to see where they're at, they are last in the league in tempo by a far margin to the top of the league. Yet at 8-1 and 18-4, clearly setting themselves up for at least a 5 or a 6 seed, given the fact that quad win games are on the horizon. But Brad Brownell deserves all the kudos for this, for not having one of the first 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 guys that we mentioned right now to be one of the best players in the league. So what that tells me is he may have a more complete team. And I know DG does a great job of expanding on this and knowing all the ins and outs of all of these rosters. But I got to give credit to my guys down at Clemson with Brad Brownell, my Coach Bender. Those guys have done a tremendous job, and here they are again, right back at the top halfway through the ACC year at 8-1 and number 2 in the conference, with presumably nobody in the top 10 individually as far as the pundits here are concerned in the midway part of the season.
Yeah, and I know this sounds crazy, but there's a chance that Clemson does not have, with all due respect, one of the 20 best players in this league. I'm not saying RJ Godfrey won't make the All-ACC team. He probably will if the Tigers keep winning. I think he is the Tigers' best player. But it is an insane accomplishment. It's actually not only a tribute to Brad Brownell, who you guys have heard me rave about for, heck, in some people's case, they've heard me talk about him for over a decade. But even in our relatively short time together on this show over a couple of years, you guys know how I feel about Brad Brownell. It is only mid-season. And Brad Brownell would get a lot of votes if the Coach of the Year award was due today. I think John Scheyer of Duke deserves a lot of credit. I think Ryan Odom at Virginia deserves a lot of credit. I think Jay Lucas at Miami deserves a lot of credit. Will Wade at NC State, depending on how the rest of the Wolfpack season goes. I think the vote as we speak would come down to Brad Brownell and John Scheyer. And I know some people roll their eyes. Scheyer has the National Player of the Year in Cam Boozer. Scheyer has the most future NBA draft picks, etc. I won't argue those points. What I will say is when a coach squeezes every last drop out of what he has, he deserves consideration, even if his team was picked to finish first in the league. even if he ended up having the National Player of the Year. Guys like Dean Smith and Mike Krzyzewski and others probably deserved more Coach of the Year trophies than they ultimately received, because so often it's the coach that finished higher than he was projected to finish who gets it. And again, I'm on board with Coach Keating's breakdown of the Brad Brownell miracle. It's a fascinating story. It's also a tribute to Coach Keating. He didn't ask for this plug, but layup is fundamentally about fits, right? Clemson is living, breathing example of how you may not have an elite player, but because of how you play defense together, because of how you share the ball, because of personality testing, because of making the puzzle pieces fit as well as humanly possible. Clemson is the best example of that in the ACC and one of the best in the entire country, period, regardless of what their talent level might be. But I can't take Jon Scheyer out of the equation, because to be 20-1, to have your only loss be by a single point, to come up with an offense that allows Cameron Boozer to be what he has become, that's not simple. All of us are smart enough to say, wow, Cameron Boozer really good. I'm glad he's on my team. Not everybody is smart enough to come up with an offense designed to take advantage of a 6'9", 250-pound guy that on a lot of possessions serves as a point forward. He's leading the team in assists. It's just not that easy. How do you convince Dame Sarr, who comes all the way to the United States, thinks he's going to be an NBA lottery pick, how do you convince him, once he realizes he's not even going to be starting all the time, he's not going to be one of the Devils' top 3 or 4 scorers? You got to get that dude to recalibrate as somebody who's been told as a young man growing up in Europe he's destined for the NBA lottery. You got to convince him to be a stopper on defense and be the point man to slow down Ibuka Okori, the star freshman guard at Stanford, in a game that not only did Dame Sarr do that well, Duke wins by 30. Those things go back to coaching. And I just think at the end of the season, Jon Scheyer won some National Coach of the Year awards last year, and he wasn't even voted the ACC Coach of the Year. We're all on a similar page here. The good news is there's several really good candidates. And if either of us wants to scream plaudits from the rooftops in favor of Brad Brownell or Jon Scheyer and others, I think all of those are compliments well earned.
It is Carolina and Duke week. So whatever team wins is going to be heralded there on the fast track to the Final Four. Whatever team loses, unfortunately, is going to gather scrutiny. Kerry Keating, these two guys, Jon Scheyer and Hubert Davis, are both very young head coaches. And they were set up to take their current roles as the head coach of the Blue Devils for Scheyer and Davis as the head coach of the Tar Heels in very different ways. How did the way that they were set up as first-time head coaches have to do with the maturity of where they are at this point in their careers so far?
Different but similar in the fact that they both played for the most legendary coaches ever in the history of not just those schools, but college basketball. And when you are raised under that pedigree and have that level of success as a player, they've taken different paths, obviously, in the intermediate. Hubert dabbled with College Game Day for a while. Jon Scheyer became a younger head coach than Hubert, if you will. But they both bleed different shades of blue that they only have known. They've known no other shade. And I think that, in the end, is really going to be a difference for them in how their legacies are built. Jon, maybe a little bit more set up for success than Hubert was. There's a little bit more transition in between. Think about the transition. We talked about how difficult it's been for Adrian Autry to follow Jim Boeheim at Syracuse so far in year 3. It does speak volumes to Jon's ability that DG has already spoken about and what he's done in handling not just this team, but the teams that he's had so far. Obviously, two guys that are maybe the best roommate combo in NBA rookie history right now in Con Knipple and Cooper Flagg. And what they did against each other in one game this year, I think the second highest scoring tandem in one game against each other for two college teammates as rookies. But you're always going to have Carolina or Duke to put behind you to show a level of strength in each of their ways. And Hubert's been a little bit more maligned in that because success hasn't been as consistent as Jon's. But I do think that this game right now is at an inflection point given the landscape of college basketball. The two of them each has one in a different way of the most dynamic freshmen out of the 5 best freshmen in the country right now. So there are a lot of similarities, yet a lot of differences. I do think this game probably has a lot more for Carolina to gain than for Duke to lose or gain, to be honest with you. I think Duke has put themselves where they can absorb whatever the consequence of this game is. But I think a win from this game this weekend could do not a lot just for Hubert this season, but maybe a lot for Hubert for continuing season and all the things that he has to manage going forward. Obviously, changing venues, which would be a big difference. We always used to say in college basketball, new ADs and new arenas get you fired. I don't know if that's going to be the case here as a new arena emerges at Carolina, but this could really do a lot for Hubert, how he manages this game and then the season going forward. Regardless of what the outcome is, the showing will be important, but I think a win this weekend and how they win the game could do a lot moving forward, not just for this season, but even for the foreseeable future for Hubert Davis.
It's like a lot of things in society right now. People will only look at the evidence that they want to support their narrative, whatever it is. And a fair assessment of Hubert Davis involves both a lot of good and a lot of bad. We just live in a world where if somebody's decided Hubert Davis is not the right guy for the Tar Heels, they're going to bring up only the negatives. And if somebody's trying to convince UNC's administration to give Hubert Davis a longer leash, they're going to talk only about the positives. The reality is, for every bad thing that's happened under Hubert Davis at Carolina, there's at least one really good thing that has happened. He took them to the national championship game. He has won an ACC regular season title. If we made a list of all the ACC's current coaches out of the 18 that have done one of it, how many have gone to the national championship game? How many have won an ACC regular season title? There are not a lot of names on those lists. Now, obviously, Hubert has also had very talented team that missed the NCAA tournament entirely. You better not do that very often at a program like the University of North Carolina. He's had the weird chemistry issues. Couldn't figure it out with Caleb Love and RJ Davis that's following year. He has had unusual examples of a guy who did well before he got to Carolina, then did really well after he was at Carolina. And that reflects poorly on the Tar Heels. But for every example that we talk about along those lines, like Elliot Cadeau is playing better for Michigan right now than he was able to play for the Tar Heels. Why did that happen? It's also true that Henry Vesar was only a backup for 3 years at Arizona and is playing by far the best basketball of his life while plugged into Hubert Davis's system at Carolina with an intelligent approach to personnel and fitting pieces together for the Tar Heels. So it's a mixed bag, of course, but I think, Mike, to further answer your question, the decision at Duke was less complicated. Remember how Coach K would always say, hey, this is not my decision. He must have said that 100 times. I do not have the authority to select my successor. We all know that whether that's technically true or not, good luck being the guy that tells Coach K, no, we're not going to follow your lead on the successor to a program you have spent the large majority of your life building into a juggernaut. But it was uncomplicated. John Scheyer is an amazingly comfortable in his own skin person. We were watching him play in a Duke uniform 16 years ago. He was still playing for the Devils. But whether you covered him as a player or as an assistant coach or now as a head coach, you know that guy, super smart, great recruiter, universally respected. The university chancellor at Duke knew him well. Nina King, the athletic director, knew him well. So that when Coach K said, Sheyer's my guy, there was no drama. There was no infighting. There were no politics. I think one of the reasons Hubert Davis gets less benefit of the doubt is that Carolina has been a weird, dysfunctional place in recent years, right? There was the mess about Bubba Cunningham not even being allowed to be the one who hired Bill Belichick in football. There was a similar mess surrounding what Bubba's role, someone I respect tremendously, what was his role as AD in hiring Hubert Davis? Why was Bubba's role in that decision less traditional than it had been in the past? We know that Roy Williams was in favor of Hubert Davis becoming his successor, and obviously Roy got his way, so to speak, as well. But from the board of trustees at that university to the change in chancellor at that university, they ran off a really good chancellor because of political nonsense. And now they're in the midst of an unusual athletic director transition. And they're coming out of these unconventional coaching searches where Bubba wasn't allowed to do the role of the regular AD role. All those things come together to help explain why Hubert Davis gets less benefit of the doubt. And it is also fair to say that Jon Scheyer's resume overall has been more consistently outstanding, both where he finishes in the ACC standings, how he signs year after year these incredibly talented high school recruiting classes and future NBA lottery picks, and then cultivates those guys. So it's a mixed bag to answer your question, but I think those are the elements that help explain it.
This is the North Carolina Sports Network. From the high country to the Outer Banks, on courts, fields, and fairways, we tell the stories of the bold North State. Follow us on social media at the NC Sports Net. We're the exclusive home of The David Glenn Show, coach-driven analysis of football and basketball. A look at the past with This Was Then, Inside NIL with Court Vision, the North Carolina Sports Awards, aka the Pineys, and the Old North State Tailgate, where we are on the ground at North Carolina's top events. Our foundational partner is NC Pork, raising the bacon, raising the bar. Telling the stories of the bold North State. Experience matters. This is NCSN, the North Carolina Sports Network.